Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring the Post-Apocalypse, Volume 2. The Sons of Japheth by Richard Wilson. A Long Way Back by Ben Bova. Homecoming by Miguel Hidalgo. The Valley of the Masters by Charles Minor Blackford. Small World by William F. Nolan. The Sons of Japheth by Richard Wilson, originally published in Infinity, December 1956. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Pilot Officer Roy Vangen happened to be spaceborne when the Earth exploded. In that way, he escaped the annihilation along with one other man, revered old Dr. Garfield Garr, who was in the space station. Roy had backed well off in preparation for a Mark 10 dive on Kabul, which the enemy had lately taken over. He had one small omnibon left in his racks, and Kabul had seemed to be about the right size. But then the destruction of Earth changed his plans. He watched, expressionless, as the planet exploded. He shrugged. There was nothing to do now but go see Dr. Garr. Roy's phoscope clamoured insistently, and he tensed, thinking a spaceborne enemy was on him. But it was only a piece of exploding Earth stumbling by. Dr. Garr was alone in the space station because all able-bodied men had been called to fight World War V. The governments of Earth, in a rare moment of conscience during the short truce, had agreed that Dr. Garr, as the embodiment of all earthly knowledge, should be protected from harm. Pilot Officer Roy Vangen didn't receive as warm a reception from old Dr. Garr as he might have, considering that they were the only 2 people left. The old man was combing his white beard with his fingers and didn't offer to shake hands. "Well," said Roy as he defused his bomb and secured his single-seater in the space lock, "I guess it's all over." "Scarcely a historic statement," Dr. Garr said, "but it describes the situation." "If you don't have anything for me to do, I'd just as soon have a drink. They usually let me have a stiff one after I complete a mission." Dr. Garr examined the hard young pilot from under shaggy white eyebrows. "I do have another mission for you, but you can have a drink first. Peach brandy is all that's left." "That'll be fine," Roy said. "I was never particular." "Then you're my man," Dr. Garr said, giving him a deep look, "because I want you to go back in time and destroy humanity." "Whatever you say," Roy's training showed. "But if I may comment, wouldn't that be superfluous? Except for you and me, the human race is finished. We've achieved our objective." He spoke without irony. "Never my objective." "I'm not a scholar, and I mean no offence," Roy said, "but I believe it was the coordinated spatial theory you announced back in '06 that made it possible." "Misapplication," Dr. Garr said wearily, not wanting to go into it further for such an audience, though, he thought, he'd never have another. "Come into my study and have your brandy." "I still don't understand," Roy said later. He reached tentatively for the bottle. When the old man made no objection, he poured a second stiff one. "You want me to go back in time and wipe out all human life," Roy said. "I assume you'll tell me when and where. All right? That would destroy our ancestors, and so we'd cease to exist too. Wouldn't it be simpler to kill ourselves now? That is, if you see no point to our further existence." Old Dr. Garr watched the other remnant of earthly life twirl the brandy in the goblet. He looked at the view screen. It showed a panorama of rock dust and steam where Earth had been. "You forget that we have annihilated everything," Dr. Garr said, gazing pensively at the screen. "Mankind, the animals, plant life, and the tiny things that creep the earth or swim the waters. Your mission will be more selective. Selective? How? You'll destroy man, but the rest will live. They may evolve into something better. If you say so, Doctor. Roy's devotion to duty was a well-worn path. Assuming you have the machine and I can operate it. The machine is merely an attachment. It will plug into the instrument panel of your spacecraft. It operates automatically. Good enough. You always were a whiz at these things. How far back do I go, and who do I kill? I want you to strafe the Ark, exercising care not to hurt any of the animals, said old Dr. Garfield Garr. Noah's Ark? Pilot Officer Roy Vanjan asked. You mean during the flood? Yes, I've computed it exactly. You won't have to worry about getting there at the wrong time. You mean after the 40 days rain, so I'll have good visibility? Good-o. He agreed readily, and he'd do as the doctor said, of course, but he permitted a trace of scepticism in his inflection and a searching look into his goblet. No, not the 40th day, Dr. Garr said, but in what we are told was the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month. The animals need dry land. I have it all figured out. I hope so. I mean, I'm sure you have. You're the doctor, of course, but wasn't there some doubt about the accuracy of the old book? I didn't know you were a fundamentalist. Am I not the repository of all human knowledge? Dr. Garr asked. He was not a bit angry with Roy Vanjan. Am I not the last best hope? Has not all else failed us? Well, sure. Did not the Noahic covenant, under which human government was established, fail? Has not Japhetic science been our undoing? Roy looked lost. I'm no scholar, Doctor. Agreed. Perhaps you'll grant that I am. He looked with supreme calm at the young pilot. I'm your new intelligence officer, and you're merely my striking arm. Help yourself to another brandy, son. Maybe I'd better not. I don't want to goof the mission. There's time. You'll want some sleep first. All right. I suppose I'll need a steady hand to murder Noah and the rest. And Shem, and Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife, said Dr. Garr, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, as it was written, especially Japheth. But not the animals, remember? I understand that. If you think the 10 Commandments don't apply, whichever one of them it was. They were an element of the Mosaic covenant. It, too, failed. Perhaps the Garrick covenant, if I may be so vain, will endure. The waters covered the earth. A moment ago, before he activated the attachment, Pilot Officer Roy Vanjan's spacecraft had been plunging toward the vortex of a ragged ball of dust and vapor, the destroyed Earth of World War V. Now, in the Adamic year 601, or was it the Edenic? He couldn't remember, though Dr. Garr had let him study the book. The waters stretched everywhere. Ahead the sun glinted in reflection from something rising above the surface. Ararat? He made out the twin peaks. He throttled back to scarcely more than Mach 1 and flew over them high. His second pass took him back along his own vapor trail. This time he spotted the tiny surface craft making for the solitary bit of land. He had to hand it to Dr. Garr. The old boy's space-time grid had hit it right on the button. Roy was too high to distinguish details, but he imagined that Noah and his family would be on deck, full of the wonder of Mount Ararat rising, as promised, from the sea. But there was another wonder. The vapor trails that stretched for miles across the upper air. Did they, down there on the ark, think them a sign of the Lord? Roy smiled ironically. They were the sign of the Lord Garr and of his servant, Pilot Officer Vanjan, come to blast them into eternity and change the future, to give the animals a chance. Who would chronicle his role as a rearranging angel, the unheavenly host about to gather up in violence the drifting souls below? Who, he wondered, some simian scribe, some unborn elephant prophet, an insected scholar destined to evolve from among the creeping things that would inherit the earth? Or perhaps the written word would die unborn under the fiery hail of his guns. No matter. These questions and more had been anticipated by Dr. Garr. Soon now, at the end of Roy's strafing run, it would be up to history to begin assembling the answers. He slowed to Mach Minus and set out wings. He would have to dip close to see if the entire Ark's complement was on deck. The job had to be done right, or Earth was kaput. Nothing personal, Noah, old boy. There they were, on the starboard side of the top deck, well out from under the pitch of the roof, craning their necks for a look at this miracle in the sky where they had expected to see only a returning dove. "Behold," Roy cried out, "I bring you tidings, but not the tidings of the dove. I am a lost raven returned, the raven of death. My tidings are of the new future which your descendants will not know, and so will not doom." The frightened upturned faces were far behind, and he was talking to himself. "Hear me, Noah, for I am come to destroy you, and with you your seeds of self-destruction. These are the tidings I bring from the future that has ceased to exist because you existed, the future that will exist once more when you cease to." He heeled the spacecraft over and back. No more speeches, he told himself, though he had studied the book in fascination. He was a killer, not a philosopher. He would have to make his strafing run low. If he dived on his target, his bullets would go into the holes and kill the animals. He roared at the Ark a few feet above the waves. They were all together in a clump, the 8 of them. "Farewell, Noah," he thought as his thumbs pressed on the death-dealing button. "Farewell, Noah and Noah's wife. Farewell, Ham and Ham's wife and unborn sons. Farewell, Canaan and Cush and Mizraim and Phut. Farewell, Shem and unborn Elam and Ashur and Arphaxad and Lud and Aram. And farewell, Japheth, father of sons of science. Farewell, Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshech and Tiras. Farewell, all tribes. Make way for the animal kingdom in the Garrick Covenant." He had made 3 passes, and now he zoomed into the sky. He had destroyed humanity and changed the future. Or had he? He'd be dead too if he had, gone like the snap of a finger with the last gasp from the Ark. He had killed his ancestors. He had killed everybody's ancestors, but he existed still. Where was the paradox that Dr. Garr had overlooked? The Ark had drifted closer to the shore. He circled it and counted the lifeless bodies lying in red stains on the gopher wood of the deck. 8. Then he noticed the change. The backs of his hands were hairier. His shoes were binding him. When he kicked them off, his agile toes curled comfortably around the control pedals. He had a glimpse of a hairy, flat-nosed face reflected in the instrument panel. It laughed, and the sound came out a simian yap. But for all that, he was still a sentient being. His control of the spacecraft was as expert as before. It hadn't worked. "Do you hear, Dr. Garr?" he thought. "It's a flop. I goofed the mission. We're all dead no matter what." "I give you a new commandment, man who would be God. Thou shalt not tamper with time." He had changed the future, and in the future he himself had been changed, but not enough. Somewhere below in the hold of the Ark were his ancestors who had evolved along a new path in the new future. The evolution had been slower, perhaps, but it had been as sure, external appearances notwithstanding. Somewhere in the far new future, he was sure, there was a simian Dr. Garr looking down in solitude on the remains of Earth. The ark had touched the land. The animals, his fellow creatures, were beginning to go forth, 2 by 2, onto the shore of Ararat. His phoscope set up a clamour. There in the sky was a new thing, a spacecraft like his, yet unlike it. It looked deadlier, more purposeful. Ignoring him, it was diving out of the unknowable future to destroy its own past. He watched in professional admiration as his fellow pilots screamed a knurling for the Ark in sacrificial completion of the mission he himself had failed to accomplish. Death to the animals, too, from an animal pilot. He knew then that Earth would not die. It might circle lifeless for eons, waiting to welcome the foot or paw or tentacle of others from outside. But it would be there, intact and serene. Even as the mountain-shattering explosion came, and he himself ceased to exist, he knew. The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. A Long Way Back by Ben Bova, originally published in Amazing Stories, February 1960. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Tom woke slowly, his mind groping back through the hypnosis. He found himself looking toward the observation port, staring at stars and blackness. The first man in space, he thought bitterly. He unstrapped himself from the acceleration seat, feeling a little wobbly in free fall. The hypnotic trance idea worked all right. The last thing Tom remembered was Arnoldson putting him under, here in the rocket's compartment, the old man's sad, soft eyes and quiet voice. Now, 22,500 miles out, Tom was alone, except for what Arnoldson had planted in his mind for post-hypnotic suggestion to recall. The hypnosis had helped him pull through the blast-off unhurt, and even protected him against the vertigo of weightlessness. Yeah, it's a wonderful world, Tom muttered acidly. He got up from the seat cautiously, testing his coordination against zero gravity. His magnetic boots held to the deck satisfactorily. He was lean and wiry, in his early 40s, with a sharp, angular face and dark, sombre eyes. His hair had gone dead white years ago. He was encased up to his neck in a semi-flexible spacesuit. They had squirmed him into it earthside because there was no room in the cramped cabin to put it on. Tom glanced at the tiers of instrument consoles surrounding his seat. No blinking red lights, everything operating normally. As if I could do anything about it if they were wrong. Then he leaned toward the observation port, straining for a glimpse of the satellite. The satellite. 5 sealed packages floating within a 300-foot radius of emptiness, circling the Earth like a cluster of moonlets. 5 pieces sent up in 5 robot rockets and placed in the same orbit, to wait for a human intelligence to assemble them into a power-beaming satellite. 5 pieces orbiting Earth for almost 18 years, waiting for nearly 18 years while down below men blasted themselves and their cities and their machines into atoms and forgot the satellite endlessly circling, waiting for its creators to breathe life into it. The hope of the world, Tom thought, and little Tommy Morris is supposed to make it work, and then fly home again. He pushed himself back into the seat. Jason picked the wrong man. Tom, can you hear me?" He turned away from the port and flicked a switch on the radio console. "Hello, Ruth. I can hear you." A hubbub of excitement crackled through the radio receiver, then the girl's voice. "Are you all right? Is everything—" "Everything's fine," Tom said flatly. He could picture the scene back at the station. Dozens of people clustered around the jury-rigged radio, Ruth working the controls, trying hard to stay calm when it was impossible to, brushing back that permanently displaced wisp of brown hair that stubbornly fell over her forehead. "Jason will be here in a minute," she said. "He's in the tracking shack, helping to calculate your orbit." "Of course Jason will be here," Tom thought. Aloud he said, "He needn't bother. I can see the satellite packages. They're only a couple of 100 yards from the ship." Even through the radio he could sense the stir that went through them. "Don't get your hopes up," he warned silently. "Remember, I'm no engineer. Engineers are too valuable to risk on this job. I'm just a tool, a mindless screwdriver sent here to assemble this glorified tinker toy. I'm the muscle. Arnoldson is the nerve link, and Jason is the brain." Abruptly, Jason's voice surged through the radio speaker. "We did it, Tom. We did it." "No," Tom thought. "You did it, Jason. This is all your show." "You should be able to see the satellite components," Jason said. His voice was excited, yet controlled, and his comment had a ring of command in it. "I've already looked," Tom answered. "I can see them." "Are they damaged?" "Not as far as I can see. Of course, from this distance." "Yes, of course," Jason said. "You'd better get right outside and start working on them. You've only got 48 hours worth of oxygen." "Don't worry about me," Tom said into the radio. "Just remember your end of the bargain." "You'd better forget that until you get back here." "I'm not forgetting anything." "I mean, you must concentrate on what you're doing up there if you expect to get back alive." "When I get back, we're going to explore the bombed-out cities. You promised that. It's the only reason I agreed to this." Jason's voice stiffened. "My memory is quite as good as yours. We'll discuss the expedition after you return. Now you're using up valuable time. And oxygen." "Okay, I'm going outside." Ruth's voice came back on. "Tom, remember to keep the ship's radio open, or else your suit radio won't be able to reach us. And we're all here. Dr. Arnoldson, Jason, the engineers. If anything comes up, we'll be right here to help you." Tom grinned mirthlessly. "Right here. 22,500 miles away." "Tom?" "Yes, Ruth." "Good luck," she said. "From all of us." Even Jason, he wanted to ask, but instead said merely, "Thanks." He fitted the cumbersome helmet over his head and sealed it to the joints on his suit. A touch of a button on the control panel pumped the compartment's air into storage cylinders. Then Tom stood up and unlocked the hatch directly over his seat. Reaching for the handholds just outside the hatch, he pulled himself through, and after a weightless comic ballet managed to plant his magnetized boots on the skin of the ship. Then, standing, he looked out at the universe. Oddly, he felt none of the overpowering emotion he had once expected of this moment. Grandeur, terror, awe. No, he was strangely calm. The stars were only points of light on a dead black background. The earth was a fat crescent patched with colours. The sun, through his heavily tinted visor, was like the pictures he had seen at planetarium shows years ago. As he secured a lifeline to the grip beside the hatch, Tom thought that he felt as though someone had struck a reverse hypodermic into him and drained away all his emotions. Only then did he realize what had happened. Jason, the engineer, the leader, the man who thought of everything, had made Arnoldson condition his mind for this. No gaping at the universe for the first man in space. Too much of a chance to take. There's a job to be done, and no time for human frailty or sentiment. Not even that, Tom said to himself. He wouldn't even allow me one moment of human emotion. But as he pushed away from the ship and floated ghost-like toward the largest of the satellite packages, Tom twisted around for another look at Earth. I wonder if she looked that way before the war. Slowly, painfully, men had attempted to rebuild their civilization after the war had exhausted itself. But of all the things destroyed by the bombs and plagues, the most agonizing loss was man's sources of energy. The coal mines, the oil refineries, the electricity-generating plants, the nuclear power piles, all shattered into radioactive rubble. There could be no return to any kind of organized society while men had to scavenge for wood to warm themselves and to run their primitive machines. Then someone had remembered the satellite. It had been designed, before the war, to collect solar energy and beam it to a receiving station on Earth. The satellite packages had been fired into a 24-hour orbit, circling the Earth over a fixed point on the equator. The receiving station, built on the southeastern coast of the United States, saw the 5 units as a single second-magnitude star low on the horizon all year, every year. Of course, the packages wavered slightly in their orbits, but not enough in 18 years to spread very far apart. A man could still put them together into a power-beaming satellite. If he could get there, and if they were not damaged. And if he knew how to put them together. Through months that stretched into years, over miles of radioactive wilderness, on horseback, on carts, on foot, those who knew about the satellite spread the word carefully, secretly, to what was left of North America's scientists and engineers. Gradually, they trickled into the once abandoned settlement. They elected a leader, Jason, the engineer, one of the few men who knew anything about rockets to survive the war and the lunatic bands that hunted down anyone suspected of being connected with pre-war science. Jason's first act was to post guards around the settlement. Then he organized the work of rebuilding the power receiving station and a man-carrying rocket. They pieced together parts of a rocket and equipment that had been damaged by the war. What they did not know, they learned. What they did not have, they built or cannibalized from ruined equipment. Jason sent armed foragers out for gasoline, charcoal, and wood. They built a ramshackle electricity generator. They planted crops and hunted the small game in the local underbrush. A major celebration occurred whenever a forager came back towing a stray cow or horse or goat. They erected fences around the settlement, because more than once they had to fight off the small armies of looters and anti-scientists that still roved the countryside. But finally they completed the rocket, after exhausting almost every scrap of material and every ounce of willpower. Then they picked a pilot, Thomas H. Morris, age 41, former historian and teacher. He had arrived a year before the completion of the rocket after walking 1,300 miles to find the settlement. His purpose was to organize some of the scientists and explore the bombed-out cities to see what could be salvaged out of man's shattered heritage. But Tom was ideal for the satellite job. The right size, 5'6", and 130 pounds. No dependents. Wife and 2 sons dead of radiation sickness. True, he had no technical background whatsoever, but with Arnoldson's hypnotic conditioning, he could be taught all that was necessary for him to know. Maybe. Best of all, though, he was thoroughly expendable. So Jason made a deal with him. There could be no expeditions into the cities until the satellite was finished, because every man was needed at the settlement, and the satellite could not be finished until someone volunteered to go up in the rocket and assemble it. It was like holding a candy bar in front of a small child. He accepted Jason's terms. The earth turned, and with it the tiny spark of life alone in the emptiness around the satellite. Tom worked, unmindful of time, his eyes and hands following Jason's engineering commands through Arnoldson's post-hypnotic directions, with occasional radio conferences. But his conscious mind sought refuge from the strangeness of space, and he talked almost constantly into his radio while he worked, talked about anything, everything, to the girl on the other end of the invisible link. And once the settlement is getting the power beamed from this contraption, we're going to explore the cities. Guess we won't be able to get very far inland, but we can still tackle Washington, Philadelphia, and New York. Plenty for us there. Ruth asked, "What were they like before the war?" "The cities?" "That's right. You're too young to remember. They were big, Ruth, with buildings so tall people call them skyscrapers." He pulled a wrench from his magnetic holder in the satellite's self-contained tool bin. "And filled with life. Millions of people lived in each one. All the people we have at the settlement could have lived on one floor of a good-sized hotel." "What's a hotel?" Tom grinned as he tugged at a pipe fitting. "You'll find out when you come with us. You'll see things you could never imagine." "I don't know if I'll come with you." He looked up from his work and stared earthward. "Why?" "Well, Jason. He says there isn't much left to see, and it's all radioactive and diseased." "Nonsense." "But Jason says—" Tom snorted. "Jason hasn't been out of the settlement for 6 years. I walked from Chicago to the settlement a year ago. I went through a dozen cities. They're wrecked, and the radioactivity count was higher than it is here at the settlement, but it's not high enough to be dangerous." "And you want to explore those cities? Why?" "Let's just say I'm an historian," Tom answered, while his hands manipulated complex wiring unconsciously, as though they belonged not to him, but to some unseen puppeteer. "I don't understand," Ruth said. "Look, those cities hold mankind's memory. I want to gather up the fragments of civilization before the last book is used for kindling and the last machine turns to rust. We need the knowledge in the cities if we expect to rebuild a civilization." "But Jason and Dr. Arnoldson and the engineers, they know all about—" "Jason and the engineers," Tom snapped. "They had to stretch themselves to the breaking point to put together this rocket from parts that were already manufactured, waiting for them. Do you think they'd know how to build a city? Dr. Arnoldson is a psychiatrist. His efforts at surgery are pathetic. Have you ever seen him try to set a broken leg? And what about agriculture? What about tool-making, or mining, or digging wells, even— what about education? How many kids your own age can read or write?" "But the satellite—" "The satellite won't be of any use to people who can't work the machines. The satellite is no substitute for knowledge. Unless something is done, your grandchildren will be worshipping the machines, but they won't know how to repair them." "No." "Yes, Ruth," he insisted. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the static-streaked hum in his earphones. "You're wrong, Tom. You're wrong. The satellite will send us the power we need. Then we'll build our machines and teach our children." "How can you teach what you don't know?" Tom wanted to ask, but didn't. He worked without talking, hauling the weightless tons of satellite packages into position, electronically welding them together, splicing wiring systems too intricate for his conscious mind to understand. Twice he pulled himself back along the lifeline into the ship for capsule meals and stimulants. Finally, he found himself staring at his gloved hands moving industriously within the bowels of one of the satellite packages. He stopped, suddenly aware that it was piercingly cold and totally dark except for the lamp on his helmet. He pushed away from the unfinished satellite. 2 of the packages were assembled now. The big parabolic mirror and 2 other uncrated units hung nearby, waiting impassively. Tom groped his way back into the ship. After taking off his helmet and swallowing a couple of energy pills, he said to the ship's radio, "What time is it?" The abrupt sound of his own voice half startled him. "Nearly 4 a.m. It was Jason. "Earth's blotted out the sun," Tom muttered. "Getting damned cold in here." "You're in the ship?" "Yes. It got too cold for the suit." "Turn up the ship's heaters," Jason said. "What's the temperature in there?" Tom glanced at the thermometer as he twisted the thermostat dial as far as it would go. 49, he answered. He could sense Jason nod. "The heaters are on minimum power automatically, unless you turn them up. It'll warm you up in a few seconds. How's the satellite?" Tom told him what remained to be done. "You're not even half through yet." Jason's voice grew fainter, and Tom knew that he was doing some mental arithmetic as he thought out loud. "You've been up about 20 hours. At the rate you're going, you'll need another 24 to finish the job. That will bring you very close to your oxygen limit." Tom sat impassively and stared at the grey metal and coloured knobs of the radio. "Is everything going all right?" Jason asked. "How should I know? Ask Arnoldson." "He's asleep. They all are." "Except you." "That's right," Jason said. "Except me." "How long did Ruth stay on the radio?" "About 16 hours. I ordered her to sleep a few hours ago." "You're pretty good at giving orders," Tom said. "Someone has to." "Yeah." Tom ran a hand across his mouth. "Boy, could I use a cigarette." "Funny, I haven't even thought about them in years." "Look," he said to the radio, "we might as well settle something right now. How many men are you going to let me have?" "Don't you think you'd better save that for now and get back to work?" "It's too damned cold out there. My fingers are still numb. You could have done a better job on insulating this suit." "There are lots of things we could have done," Jason said, "if we had the material." "What about the expedition? How many men can I have?" "As many as you can get," the radio voice answered. "I promised I won't stand in your way once the satellite is finished and operating." "Won't stand in my way," Tom repeated. "That means you won't encourage anyone either." Jason's voice rose a trifle. "I can't encourage my people to go out and risk their lives just because you want to poke around some radioactive slag heaps." "You promised that if I put the satellite together and got back alive, I could investigate the cities. That was our deal." "That's right. You can. And anyone foolish enough to accompany you can follow along." "Jason, you know I need at least 25 armed men to venture out of the settlement." "Then you admit it's dangerous," the radio voice crackled. "Sure, if we meet a robber band. You've sent out enough foraging groups to know that, and we'll be travelling hundreds of miles. But it's not dangerous for the reasons you've been circulating, radioactivity and disease germs and that nonsense. There's no danger that one of your own foraging groups couldn't handle. I came through the cities last year alone, and I made it." Tom waited for a reply from the radio, but only the hissing and crackling of electrical disturbances answered him. "Jason, those cities hold what's left of a worldwide civilization. We can't begin to rebuild unless we reopen that knowledge. We need it. We need it desperately." "It's either destroyed or radioactive, and to think anything else is self-delusion. Besides, we have enough intelligence right here at the settlement to build a new civilization better than the old one, once the satellite is ready." "But you don't!" Tom shouted. "You poor damned fool! You don't even realize how much you don't know." "This is a waste of time," Jason snapped. "Get outside and finish your work." "I'm still cold, damn it," Tom said. He glanced at the thermometer on the control console. "Jason, it's below freezing in here." "What?" "The heating unit isn't working at all." "Impossible. You must have turned it off instead of on." "I can read, damn it. It's turned as high as it'll go." "What's the internal thermometer reading?" Tom looked. "Barely 30, and it's still going down." "Hold on. I'll wake Arnoldson and the electrical engineers." Silence. Tom stared at the inanimate radio, which gave off only the whines and scratches of lightning and sun and stars, all far distant from him. For all his senses could tell him, he was the last living thing in the universe. Sure, call a conference, Tom thought. How much more work is there to be done? About 24 hours, he said. Another day, and another full night. Another night, this time with no heat, and maybe no oxygen either. The heaters must have been working tonight until I pushed them up to full power. Something must have blown out. Maybe it's just a broken wire. I could fix that, if they tell me how. But if it's not, no heat tomorrow night. No heat at all. Then Arnoldson's voice floated up through the radio speaker, soft, friendly, calm, soothing. The next thing Tom knew, he was putting on his helmet. Sunlight was lancing through the tinted observation port, and the ship was noticeably warmer. "What happened?" he mumbled through the dissolving haze of hypnosis. "It's all right, Tom," Ruth's voice. "Dr. Arnoldson put you under and had you check the ship's wiring. Now he and Jason and the engineers are figuring out what to do. They said it's nothing to worry about. They'll have everything figured out in a couple of hours." "And I'm to work on the satellite until they're ready?" "Yes." "Don't call us. We'll call you." "What?" "Nothing." "It's all right, Tom. Don't worry." "Sure, Ruth. I'm not worried." That makes us both liars. He worked mechanically, handling the unfamiliar machinery with the engineer's knowledge through Arnoldson's hypnotic communication. Just like the pictures they used to show of nuclear engineers handling radioactive materials with remotely controlled mechanical hands from behind a concrete wall. I'm only a pair of hands, a couple of opposed thumbs, a fortunate mutation of a self-conscious simian. But, God, why don't they call? She said it wasn't anything big, just the wiring, probably. Then why don't they call? He tried to work without thinking about anything, but he couldn't force his mind into stillness. Even if I can fix the heaters, even if I don't freeze to death, I might run out of oxygen. And how am I going to land the ship? The takeoff was automatic, but even Jason and Arnoldson can't make a pilot out of me. "Tom," Jason's voice. "Yes," he jerked to attention and floated free of the satellite. "We've, checked what you told us about the ship's electrical system while Arnoldson had you under the hypnotic trance." "And?" "Well, it, looks as though one of the batteries gave out. The batteries feed all the ship's lights, heat, and electrical power. With one of them out, you don't have enough power to run the heaters." "There's no way to fix it?" "Not unless you cut out something else. And you need everything else. The radio, the controls, the oxygen pumps." "What about the lights? I don't need them. I've got the lamp on my suit helmet." "They don't take as much power as the heaters do. It wouldn't help at all." Tom twisted weightlessly and stared back at Earth. "Well, just what the hell am I supposed to do?" "Don't get excited," Jason's voice grated in his earphones. We've calculated it all out. According to our figures, your suit will store enough heat during the day to last the night. I nearly froze to death last night, and the ship was heated most of the time. It will get cold, Jason's voice answered calmly. But you should be able to make it. Your own body warmth will be stored by the suit's insulation, and that will help somewhat. But you must not open the suit all night, not even to take off your helmet. And the oxygen? You can take all the replacement cylinders from the ship and keep them at the satellite. The time you save by not having to go back and forth to the ship for fresh oxygen will give you about an hour's extra margin. You should be able to make it. Tom nodded. And of course, I'm expected to work on the satellite right through the night. It will help you keep your mind off the cold. If we see that you're not going to make it, either because of the cold or the oxygen, we'll warn you, and you can return to the settlement. Suppose I have enough oxygen to just finish the satellite, but if I do, I won't have enough to fly home. Will you warn me then? Don't be dramatic. Go to hell. Dr. Arnoldson said he could put you under. Jason continued unemotionally. But he thinks you might freeze once your conscious mind went asleep. You've figured out all the details, Tom muttered. All I have to do is put your damned satellite together without freezing to death, and then fly 22,500 miles back home before my air runs out. Simple. He glanced at the sun, still glaring bright even through his tinted visor. It was nearly on the edge of the Earth disk. All right, Tom said. I'm going into the ship now for some pills. It's nearly sunset. Cold. Dark, and so cold that numbers lost their meaning. Paralyzing cold, seeping in through the suit while you worked, crawling up your limbs until you could hardly move. The whole universe hung up in the sky and looked down on the small, cold figure of a man struggling blindly with machinery he could not understand. Dark, dark and cold. Ruth stayed on the radio as long as Jason would allow her, talking to Tom, keeping the link with life and warmth. But finally Jason took over, and the radio went silent. So don't talk, Tom growled silently. I can keep warm just by hating you, Jason. He worked through the frigid night, struggling ant-like with huge pieces of equipment. Slowly he assembled the big parabolic mirror, the sighting mechanism, and the atomic converter. With dreamy motions, he started connecting the intricate wiring systems. And all the while he raged at himself. Why? Why did it have to be this way? Why me? Why did I agree to do this? I knew I'd never live through it. Why did I do it? He retraced the days of his life, the preparations for the flight, the arguments with Jason over exploring the cities, his trek from Chicago to the settlements, the aimless years after the radiation death of his 2 boys and Marjorie, his wife. Marjorie and the boys, lying sick month after month, dying one after the other in a cancerous agony while he stood by helplessly in the ruins of what had been their home. No, his mind warned him. Don't think of that. Not that. Think of Jason. Jason, who prevents you from doing the one thing you want, who is taking your life from you. Jason, the peerless leader. Jason, who is afraid of the cities. Why? Why is he afraid of the cities? That's the hub of everything down there. Why does Jason fear the cities? It wasn't until he finished connecting the satellite's last unit, the sighting mechanism, that Tom realized the answer. One answer, and everything fell into place. Everything, except what Tom Morris was going to do about it. Tom squinted through the twin telescopes of the sighting mechanism again, then pushed away and floated free, staring at the earth bathed in pale moonlight. What do I do now? For an instant he was close to panic, but he forced it down. Think, he said to himself. You're supposed to be a Homo sapiens. Use that brain. Think. The long night ended. The sun swung around from behind the bulk of earth. Tom looked at it as he felt its warmth penetrating the insulated suit, and he knew it was the last time he would see the sun. He felt no more anger. Even his hatred of Jason was drained out of him now. In its place was a sense of finality. He spoke into his helmet mic. Jason! He is in conference with the astronomers, Dr. Arnoldson's voice. Get him for me, please. A few minutes of silence, broken only by the star whisperings in his earphones. Jason's voice was carefully modulated. Tom, you made it. I made it. And the satellite's finished. It's finished? Good. Now, what we have to do... Wait, Tom interrupted. It's finished, but it's useless. What? Tom twisted around to look at the completed satellite, its oddly angled framework and bulbous machinery glinting fiercely in the newly risen sun. After I finished it, I looked through the sighting mechanism to make certain the satellite's transmitters were correctly aimed at the settlement. Nobody told me to, but nobody said not to either, so I looked. It's a simple mechanism. The transmitters are pointed smack in the middle of Hudson's Bay. You're sure? Certainly. You can rotate the antennas. I know. I tried it. I can turn them as far south as the Great Lakes. A long pause. I was afraid of this, Jason's voice said evenly. I bet you were, Tom answered to himself. You must have moved the satellite out of position while assembling its components. So my work here comes to nothing because this satellite's power beam can't reach the settlement's receivers. Not unless you use the ship to tow the satellite into the proper orbital position, Jason stammered. You actually went through with it, Tom thought. Aloud, he said, but if I use the ship's engine to tow the satellite, I won't have enough fuel left to get back to Earth, will I? Not to mention oxygen. A longer pause. No. I have 2 questions, Jason. I think I know the answers to them both, but I'll ask you anyway. 1. You knew this would happen, didn't you? What do you mean? You've calculated this insane business down to the last drop of sweat, Tom growled. You knew that I'd knock the satellite out of position while I was working on it, and the only way to get it back in the right orbit would be for me to tow it back and strand myself up here. This is a suicide mission, isn't it, Jason? That's not true. Don't bother defending yourself. I don't hate you anymore, Jason. I understand you, damn it. You made our deal as much to get rid of me as to get your precious satellite put together. No one can force you to tow the satellite. Sure, I can leave it where it is and come back home, if I can fly this ship, which I doubt. And what would I come back to? I left a world without power. I'd return to a world without hope. And some dark night, one of your disappointed young goons would catch up with me, and no one would blame him, would they? Jason's voice was brittle. You'll tow it into position. After you answer my second question, Tom countered. Why are you afraid of the cities? Afraid? I'm not afraid. Yes, you are. Oh, you could use the hope of exploring the cities to lure me up here in this suicide job, but you knew I'd never be back to claim my half of the bargain. You're afraid of the cities, and I think I know why. You're afraid of the unknown quantity they represent, distrustful of your own leadership when new problems arise. We've worked for more than 10 years to make this settlement what it is, Jason fumed. We fought and died to keep those marauding lunatics from wrecking us. We are mankind's last hope. We can't afford to let others in. They're not scientists. They wouldn't understand. They'd ruin everything. Mankind's last hope, terrified of men. Tom was suddenly tired, weary of the whole struggle. But there was something he had to tell them. Listen, Jason, he said. The walls you've built around the settlement weren't meant to keep you from going outside. You're not a self-sufficient little community. You're cut off from mankind's memory, from his dreams, from his ambitions. You can't even start to rebuild a civilization. And if you do try, don't you think the people outside will learn about it? Don't you think they've got a right to share in whatever progress the settlement makes? And if you don't let them, don't you realize that they'll destroy the settlement? Silence. I'm a historian, Tom continued, and I know that a civilization can't exist in a vacuum. If outsiders don't conquer it, it'll rot from within. It's happened to Babylonia, Greece, Rome, China even, over and again. The Soviets built an iron curtain around themselves and wiped themselves out because of it. Don't you see, Jason? There are only two types of animals on this planet, the gamblers and the extinct. It won't be easy to live with the outsiders. There'll be problems of every type, but the alternative is decay and destruction. You've got to take the chance. If you don't, you're dead. A long silence. Finally, Jason said, You've only got about a half-hour's worth of oxygen left. Will you tow the satellite into the proper position? Tom stared at the planet unseeingly. Yes, he mumbled. I'll have to check some calculations with the astronomers. Jason's voice buzzed flatly in his earphones. A background murmur, scarcely audible over the crackling static. Then Ruth's voice broke through. Tom, you can't do this. You won't be able to get back. I know, he said, as he started pulling his way along the lifeline back to the ship. No, come back, Tom, please. Come back. Forget the satellite. Come back and explore the cities. I'll go with you. Please don't die, Tom. Please don't die. Ruth, you're too young to cry over me. I'll be all right. Don't worry. No, it isn't fair. It never is, Tom said. Listen, Ruth. I've been dead a long time, since the bombs fell, I guess. My world died then, and I died with it. When I came to the settlement, when I agreed to make this flight, I think we all knew I'd never return, even if we wouldn't admit it to ourselves. But I'm just one man, Ruth, one small part of the story. The story goes on, with or without me. There's tomorrow, your tomorrow. I've got no place in it, but it belongs to you. So don't waste your time crying over a man who died 18 years ago. He snapped off his suit radio and went the rest of the way to the ship in silence. After locking the hatch and pumping air back into the cabin, he took off his helmet. Good, clean, canned air, Tom said to himself. Too bad it won't last longer. He sat down and flicked a switch on the radio console. All right, do you have those calculations ready? In a few moments, Arnoldson's voice. 10 minutes later, Tom re-emerged from the ship and made his ghost-like way back to the satellite sighting mechanism. He checked the artificial moon's position, then went back to the ship. On course, he said to the radio. The transmitters are pointing a little northwest of Philadelphia. Good, Arnoldson's voice answered. Now, your next blast should be 3 seconds duration in the same direction. "No," Tom said. "I've gone as far as I'm going to." "What?" "I'm not moving the satellite any farther." "But you still have not enough fuel to return to Earth. Why are you stopping here?" "I'm not coming back," Tom answered. "But I'm not going to beam the satellite's power to the settlement either." "What are you trying to pull?" Jason's voice, furious, panicky. "It's simple, Jason. If you want the satellite's power, you can dismantle the settlement and carry it to Pennsylvania. The transmitters are aimed at some good farming country and within miles of a city that's still half intact." "You're insane." "Not at all. We're keeping our deal, Jason. I'm giving you the satellite's power, and you're going to allow exploration of the cities. You won't be able to prevent your people from rummaging through the cities now, and you won't be able to keep the outsiders from joining you, not once you get out from behind your own fences." "You can't do this, you—" Tom snapped off the radio. He looked at it for a second or two, then smashed a heavy-booted foot against the console. Glass and metal crashed satisfactorily. "Okay," Tom thought. "It's done. Maybe Jason's right and I'm crazy, but we'll never know now. In a year or so they'll be set up outside Philadelphia, and a lot better for it. I'm forcing them to take the long way back, but it's a better way. The only way, maybe." He leaned back in the seat and stared out the observation port at the completed satellite. Already it was taking in solar energy and beaming it earthward. In 10 years, they'll send another ship up here to check the gadget and make sure everything's okay. Maybe they'll be able to do it in 5 years. Makes no difference. I'll still be here.
The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story.
Homecoming by Miguel Hidalgo. Originally published in Worlds of If, April 1958. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The large horse plodded slowly over the shifting sand. The rider was of medium size, with huge, strong hands and seemingly hollow eyes. Strange eyes, alive and aflame. They had no place in the dust-caked, tired body. Yet there they were, seeking, always seeking, searching the clear horizon, and never seeming to find what they sought. The horse moved faster now. They were nearing a river. The water would be welcome on tired bodies and dry throats. He spurred his horse, and when they reached the water's edge, he dismounted and unsaddled the horse. Then both man and horse plunged headlong into the waiting torrent, deep into the cool embrace of the clear liquid. They soaked it into their pores and drank deeply of it, feeling life going once more through their veins. Satisfied, they lifted themselves from the water, and the man lay down on the yellow sand of the river bank to sleep. When he awoke, the sun was almost setting. The bright shafts of red light spilled across the sky, making the mountains silent scarlet shadows on the face of the rippling water. Quickly he gathered driftwood and built a small fire. From his pack he removed some of the coffee he had found in one of the ruined cities. He brought water from the river in the battered coffee pot he had salvaged, and while he waited for it to boil, he went to his horse, Conqueror, stroking his mane and whispering in his ear. Then he led him silently to a grassy slope where he hobbled him and left him for the night. In the fading light, he ate the hard beef jerky and drank the scalding coffee. Refreshed and momentarily content, He sat staring into the dying fire, seeing the bright glowing coals as living fingers clutching at the wood in consuming embrace, taking all and returning nothing but ashes. Slowly his eyelids yielded, his body sagged, and blood seemed to fill his brain, bathing it in a gentle, warm flood. He slept. His brain slept. But the portion of his brain called memory stirred. It was all alone. All else was at rest. Images began to appear, drawn from inexhaustible files, wherein are kept all thoughts, past, present, and future. It was the night before he was to go overseas. World War III had been declared, and he had enlisted, receiving his old rank of captain. He was with his wife in the living room of their home. They had put the children to bed, their sons, and now sat on the couch, watching the blazing fire. It was then that he had showed it to her. "I've got something to tell you, and something to show you." He had removed the box from his pocket and opened it, and heard her cry of surprised joy. "Oh, a ring, and it's a diamond too!" she cried in her rich, happy voice, which always seemed to send a thrill through his body. "It's for you. So long as you wear it, I'll come back, even from the dead, if need be. Read the inscription." She held the ring up to the light and read aloud, "It is forever." Then she had slipped the ring on her finger and her arms around him. He held her very close, feeling the warmth from her body flowing into his and making him oblivious to everything except that she was there in his arms, and that he was sinking deep, deep into a familiar sea, where he had been many times before, but each time found something new and unexplored, some vastly different emotion he could never quite explain. "Wait," she cried, "I've something for you too." She took off the locket she wore round her neck and held it up to the shimmering light, letting it spin at the end of its chain. It caught the shadows of the fire and reflected them, greatly magnified, over the room. It was in the shape of a star, encrusted with emeralds, with one large ruby in the centre. When he opened it, he found a picture of her in one side, and in the other a picture of the children. He took her in his arms again and loosened her long black hair, burying his face in it for a moment. Then he kissed her, and instantly was drawn down into the abyss which seemed to have no beginning or any end. The next morning had been bleak and grey. The mist clung to the wet, sodden ground, and the air was heavy in his lungs. He had driven off in the jeep the army had sent for him, watching her there on the porch until the mist swirled around her feet and she ran back into the house and slammed the door. His cold fingers found the locket, making a little bulge under his uniform, and the touch of it seemed to warm the blood in his veins. 3 days later, they had landed in Spain, merged with another division, then crossed the Pyrenees into France, and finally to Paris, where the fighting had begun. Already the city was a silent graveyard, littered with the rubble of towers and cathedrals which had once been great. 3 years later, they were on the road to Moscow. Over 1,000 miles lay behind, a dead man on every foot of those miles. Yet victory was near. The Russians had not yet used their H-bomb. The threat of annihilation by the retaliation forces had been too great. He had done well in the war, and had been decorated many times for bravery in action. Now he felt the victory that seemed to be in the air, and he had wished it would come quickly, so that he might return to her. Home. The very feel of the word was everything a battle-weary soldier needed to make him fight harder and live longer. Suddenly he had become aware of a droning, whooshing sound above him. It grew louder and louder until he knew what it was. "Heavy bombers! The alarm had sounded, and the men had headed for their foxholes. But the planes had passed over, the sun glinting on their bellies, reflecting a blinding light. They were bound for bigger, more important targets. When the all clear had sounded, the men clambered from their shelters. An icy wind swept the field, bringing with it clouds which covered the sun. A strange fear had gripped him then. Across the Atlantic, over the pole, via Alaska, the great bombers flew. In cities, great and small, the air raid sirens sounded, high screaming noises which had jarred the people from sleep in time to die. The defending planes roared into the sky to intercept the onrushing bombers. The horrendous battle split the universe. Many bombers fell, victims of fanatical suicide planes or of missiles that streaked across the sky which none could escape. But too many bombers got through, dropping their deadly cargo upon the helpless cities, and not all the prayers or entreaties to any god had stopped their carnage. First there had been the red flashes that melted buildings into molten streams, and then the great triple mushroom cloud filled with the poisonous gases that the wind swept away to other cities, where men had not died quickly and mercifully, but had rotted away, leaving shreds of putrid flesh behind to mark the places where they had crawled. The retaliatory forces had roared away to bomb the Russian cities. Few, if any, had returned. Too much blood and life were on their hands. Those who had remained alive had found a resting place on the crown of some distant mountain. Others had preferred the silent, peaceful sea, where flesh stayed not long on bones, and only darting fishes and merciful beams of filtered light found their aluminium coffins. The war had ended. To no avail. Neither side had won. Most of the cities and the majority of the population of both countries had been destroyed. Even their governments had vanished, leaving a silent nothingness. The armies that remained were without leaders, without sources of supplies, save what they could forage and beg from an unfriendly people. They were alone now, a group of tired, battered men, for whom life held nothing. Their families had long since died, their bodies turned to dust, their spirits fled on the winds to a new world. Yet these remnants of an army must return, or at least try. Their exodus was just beginning. Somehow he had managed to hold together the few men left from his force. He had always nourished the hope that she might still be alive. And now that the war was over, he had to return, had to know whether she was still waiting for him. They had started the long trek. Throughout Europe, anarchy reigned. He and his men were alone. All they could do now was fight. Finally, they reached the seaport city of Calais. With what few men he had left, he had commandeered a small yacht, and they had taken to the sea. After months of storms and bad luck, they had been shipwrecked somewhere off the coast of Mexico. He had managed to swim ashore, and had been found by a fisherman's family. Many months he had spent swimming and fishing, recovering his strength, inquiring about the United States. The Mexicans had spoken with fear of the land across the Rio Grande. All its great cities had been destroyed, and those that had been only partially destroyed were devoid of people. The land across the Rio Grande had become a land of shadows. The winds were poisoned, and the few people who might have survived were crazed and maimed by the blasts. Few men had dared cross the Rio Grande into El Mundo Gris de Noviembre, the November world. Those who had never returned. In time he had travelled north until he reached the Rio Grande. He had waded into the muddy waters and somehow landed on the American side, in the November world. it was rightly called. The deserts were long. All plant life had died, leaving to those once great fertile stretches nothing but the sad temporal beauty that comes with death. No people had he seen, only the ruins of what had once been their cities. He had walked through them, and all that he had seen were the small mutant rodents, and all that he had heard was the occasional swish of the wind as it whisked along what might have been dead leaves, but wasn't. He had been on the trail for a long time. His food was nearly exhausted. The mountains were just beginning, and he hoped to find food there. He had not found food, but his luck had been with him. He had found a horse. Not a normal horse, but a mutation. It was almost twice as large as a regular horse. Its skin seemed to shimmer, and was like glassy steel to the touch. From the center of its forehead grew a horn, straight out, as the horn of a unicorn. But most startling of all were the animal's eyes, which seemed to speak, a silent mental speech, which he could understand. The horse had looked up as he approached it, and seemed to say, "Follow me." And he had followed, over a mountain, until they came to a pass, and finally to a narrow path which led to an old cabin. He had found it empty, but there were cans of food, and a rifle, and many shells. He had remained there for a long time, how long he could not tell, for he could only measure time by the cycles of the sun and the moon. Finally, he had taken the horse, the rifle, and what food was left, and once again started the long journey home. The farther north he went, the more life seemed to have survived. He had seen great herds of horses like his own stampeding across the plains, and strange birds which he could not identify, yet he had seen no human beings. But he knew he was closer now, closer to home. He recognized the land. How, he did not know, for it was much changed. A sensing, perhaps, of what it had once been. He could not be more than 2 days' ride away. Once he was through this desert, he would find her. He would be with her once again. All would be well, and his long journey would be over. The images faded. Even memory slept in a flow of warm blood. Body and mind slept into the shadows of the dawn. He awoke and stretched the cramped muscles of his body. At the edge of the water, he removed his clothes and stared at himself in the rippling mirror. His muscles were lean and hard, evenly placed throughout the length of his frame. A deep ridge ran down the length of his torso, separating the muscles, making the chest broad. Well satisfied with his body, he plunged into the cold water, deep down, until he thought his lungs would burst, then swiftly returned to the clean air, tingling in every pore. He dried himself and dressed. Conqueror was eating the long grass near the stream. Quickly he saddled him. No time for breakfast. He would ride all day and the next night, and he would be home. Still northward. The hours crawled slower than a dying man. The sun was a torch that pierced the skin, seeming to melt his bones into a burning stream within his body. But day at last gave way to night, and the sun to the moon. The torch became a white, pock-marked goddess with streaming hair called stars. In the moonlight, he had not seen the crater until he was at its very edge. Even then, he might not have seen it had not the horse stopped suddenly. The wind swirled through its vast emptiness, slapping his face with dusty hands. For a moment he thought he heard voices, mournful, murmuring voices, echoing up from the misty depths. He turned quickly away and did not look back. Night paled into day. Day burned into night. There were clouds in the sky now, and a gentle wind caressed the sweat from his tired body. He stopped. There it was. Barely discernible through the moonlight, he saw it. Home. Quickly he dismounted and ran. Now he could see a small light in the window, and he knew they were there. His breath came in hard, ragged gulps. At the window he peered in, and as his eyes became accustomed to the inner gloom, he saw how bare the room was. No matter. Now that he was home, he could build new furniture, and the house would be even better than it had been before. Then he saw her. She was sitting motionless in a straight wooden chair beside the fireplace, the feeble light cast by the embers veiling her in mauve shadows. He waited, wondering if she were. Presently she stirred like a restless child in sleep, then moved from the chair to the pile of wood near the hearth and replenished the fire. The wood caught quickly, sending up long tongues of flame and forming a bright pool of light around her. His blood froze. The creature illuminated by the firelight was a monster. Large, greasy scales covered its face and arms, and there were no hair on his head. The gums were toothless cavities in a sunken, mumbling mouth. The eyes, turned momentarily toward the window, were empty of life. "No, no!" he cried soundlessly. This was not his house. In his delirium he had only imagined he had found it. He had been searching so long. He would go on searching. He was turning wearily away from the window when the movement of the creature beside the fire held his attention. It had taken a ring from one skeleton-like finger and stood, turning the ring slowly as if trying to decipher some inscription inside it. He knew then. He had come home. Slowly he moved toward the door. A great weakness was upon him. His feet were stones, reluctant to leave the earth. His body was a weed, shriveled by thirst. He grasped the doorknob and clung to it, looking up at the night sky and trying to draw strength from the wind that passed over him. It was no use. There was no strength, only fear. A kind of fear he had never known. He fumbled at his throat, his fingers crawling like cold worms around his neck until he found the locket and the clasp which had held it safely through the endless nightmare days and nights. He slipped the clasp and the locket fell into his waiting hand. As one in a dream, he opened it and stared at the pictures, now in the dim moonlight, no longer faces of those he loved, but grey ghosts from the past. Even the ruby had lost its glow. What had once been living fire was now a dull glob of darkness. "Nothing is forever." He thought he had shouted the words, but only a thin sound, the sound of leaves ruffled by the wind, came back to him. He closed the locket and fastened the clasp and hung it on the doorknob. It moved slowly in the wind, back and forth, like a pendulum. Forever, forever. Only death is forever. He could have sworn he heard the words. He ran, away from the house, to the large horse with a horn in the centre of its forehead, like a unicorn. Once in the saddle, the spurt of strength left him. His shoulders slumped, his head dropped onto his chest. Conqueror trotted away, the sound of his hooves echoing hollowly in the vast emptiness.
The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story.
The Valley of the Masters by Charles Minor Blackford. Originally published in If, Worlds of Science Fiction, September 1961. Narrated by Tom Trussel. 1. Henry stopped and squatted in the underbrush, well hidden from the path, but close enough to see the coming group. Within a minute they became visible. There were 25 to 30 boys, girls, and youths walking slowly in ragged groups, talking and laughing. The youngest were ahead, a group just entering their teens, dressed like the rest in jackets and shorts, with sandals of plast on their feet. The dark synthetic cloth made them a uniformed body. Henry's nose wrinkled in distaste. Again his hideaway would be invaded, and he would have to move on. But where to? They were opposite him now, a bare 20 feet away. Most of them looked as alike as brothers and sisters. Logically enough, there was not one who wasn't a cousin in some degree to the others. Plump, round-faced, and dull-eyed, they lived from cradle to grave according to custom. It was the custom, when they were old enough to feel the urge, to join a group like this. Together they tramped the valley from spring to fall, gathering fruit and nuts as they came in season. When a couple felt like settling down, they awaited a vacant mastership, a plot of orchard and the house that went with it, and moved in. And they took over the responsibilities of the place and bred or adopted the 3 children necessary to hold it. They remained there until they became elders. Then they moved into town, where they worked in the factories, idled, and gossiped until death overtook them. They were ignorant, superstitious, living out their dull routine as generations before them had. Only a few questioned it. Almost none made any active challenge. The youngsters sighted the tavern and made for it at a dead run, wanting to claim favourable bunks before the others arrived. Henry was impatient. Ants were crawling over his foot, but it would never do for him to be seen, especially in the woods. One didn't go into them. They were inhabited by goblins, ghosts, and fearsome animals. Finally they were past. He straightened, started to step into the path, then squatted again quickly. Coming alone behind the others was the girl. Her slimness and pale hair made her stand out from the rest. His thoughts had been upon her since that day when his group passed the house of her father, an avocado master, down in the lower valley. She had called to them to wait, had run inside to come back with the 2 pouches, one for her personal belongings, the other for food. Living on a fruit diet as they did, they ate most of their awakened hours. "I'm Theta," she called out happily as she joined them. "Mamma says I'm old enough to go with you." She recognized a cousin and ran over to join her, her hair a spot of brightness among the dark. He wanted her from that moment, but she was far too young. He would have to wait. Coming towards Theta from the opposite direction was the slap of flat feet. In a moment Henry recognized Ola. He was considerably older than the others. His only object in life was enjoying all the young girls who joined the group. He was a bulky dullard and a bully, his eyes small and mean. It was evident that he was looking for the girl. A pleased expression spread over his face when he saw her. She stopped abruptly, looking about for a way to flee, but the path was enclosed by woods, and Ola was on her. "Leave me alone!" she cried in anger as his hand closed about her wrist. Henry could see disgust for him in her eyes. Why didn't she let him have what he wanted and be done with him? That was the way most of the girls responded. "Won't have anything to do with me, eh?" gloated Ola. "Think you are too good for us? I've been watching you, asking about you. None of the boys have had you, but you won't get by me." Henry felt a surge of sympathy for her, fed by his dislike for the other. He slipped into the path. He was almost up to them before he was seen. Ola swung about, still holding the girl. Henry stopped 6 feet off. "Why don't you let her alone if she doesn't want you?" he asked her with deceiving mildness, apparently relaxed. There was startled fright in Ola's eyes. Henry had appeared so suddenly, from nowhere. Worse, he was proscribed. He was accused of learning witchery. Henry was taller than Ola, but thin and almost weak-looking. This would be something to boast about, capturing the witch single-handed, bringing him in for punishment. "Make me let her alone, then," he challenged. It was usual to boast and strut before fighting. Henry took the advantage of immediate attack. He sprang at the other, catching him before he unhanded the girl with a right to the jaw, a left to the belly. Theta ran about 50 feet down the path, then turned to watch. Ola, head down, was closing in to grip his opponent, but Henry stepped to one side, coming up with a blow to Ola's right eye. Ola raised his guard, and Henry sank both fists into the other's stomach. Ola doubled up. There was no fight in him. He plunged past Henry, down the path towards the tavern. Henry faced the girl. She came towards him without hesitation. "Thank you," she said. "I shouldn't have left the others. I didn't think he had noticed." She walked slowly towards the tavern, Henry beside her. The past year had made her taller, filled her out. Yet the sweetness of her expression was the same, and the vitality in her face and eyes. "He's been after you, then?" She nodded. "Him and a couple of others." It was just a turn in the path to sight of the tavern. Henry halted. "You seem to forget I'm proscribed," he reminded her. "I don't care. I like you. Always have." Her voice became tragic. "Why did you go into that awful learning house?" "I got tired of wondering what kept the food in the bins fresh, how it got from the hoppers in the field to the bins, what made the light and heat, where the water came from." "But the old ones did it all by magic." "What kind of magic?" His face had a slightly mocking expression. "If that was so, why are things beginning to break down? Magic should go on forever." From the direction of the tavern came sounds of shouting. He smiled at her. "You'd better go on before they think I've turned you into a bat." "Henry," she began, but she had lingered too long. The whole group rounded the turn, trotting, their face twisted in superstitious fury. They raised their arms when they sighted the two. Each hand had a stone in it. "She's one of them too!" screamed fat, malicious Heckler, seeing a chance to vent her envy. "They're planning something! Throw! Throw!" Her voice was a hysterical shriek. Henry saw the stones in the air. Grasping the girl's wrist, he drew her into the brush beside the path. He stopped his flight under an ancient tree and let go her wrist. "See," he said, "even to speak to me is dangerous." She tossed her head and brushed the hair from her brow, her eyes scornful. "I don't care. I'm sick of them." "You can go back. Give them some fancy tale about my hexing you, but say that you crossed 2 sticks or something and got away." She looked him squarely in the face, her own composed and determined. "I'd rather stay with you." He dropped to a jutting rock and scraped at the dead leaves with the heel of his sandal. "It's not nice," he began, "the life I live, hiding in the woods by day, sneaking into deserted houses or taverns at night for food and warmth. I've been doing it all summer now, and that's bad enough. In a month, the masters of these upper levels will be closing the houses and the taverns, moving to town for the winter. Everything on the lower levels will be taken up. They expect me to be starved into surrender." Theta dropped to her knees beside him. "I'd rather be with you. I've wanted to be with you ever since I first saw you, but you never seemed to notice me." "I noticed you." He placed a hand over hers. "But you were so young-looking, so sweet. I was waiting for you to grow up a little more. Then, when I found an open mastership, I was going to ask you to share it with me." Theta felt a tingling happiness. Her face flushed, her eyes brightened.
"Henry," she cried, "I've always wanted you. That's why I never—" He put an arm about her and pulled her close. They sat that way for minutes. "I'll give you a mastership," he cried out. "I'll give you the whole valley." He pushed her shoulders around until she was facing him. "What is your first wish, mistress of the valley?" "Something to eat," she said promptly. Henry made a rueful face. "My dear, that is something you will have to become used to, being hungry. Fortunately, I know of a ruined and deserted house where the bins are still operating." The forest they were in filled a steep-sided ravine. He followed it for some distance, then started abruptly up the left-hand slope to a low-crowned crest planted with apple trees. 100 yards away was the house. One corner of it was crushed by a fallen tree. The low sun made shafts of light through the trees as Henry approached it cautiously, Theta behind him. He entered through the broken wall into what was once a bedroom, then through a door into the remainder of the house. It was a typical living room they entered, with a regular ration of furnishings. The visiphone and visiscreen were set into the inner wall. A calendar clock was over the front door, its dial marked with symbols for planting, pruning, cutting, and picking. The hand was approaching the latter symbol. Henry went through into the kitchen, leaving her to watch through the window. He returned with a basket of mixed fruit. She reached for an avocado, plucking her knife from its sheath with the other hand. "Hey, wait a minute," Henry cried. "You are a sinner now, remember?" He pushed the basket towards her. "Fill your pouch first. Eat later." They ate, keeping an eye on the path towards the house until dark. No one moved at night, except on extreme emergency, and then only with lanterns and noise. Without lights on, other than the normal glow of the walls, they retired to one of the undamaged bedrooms. "See?" she said with a rippling, contented laugh. "I waited for you." 2. It was still dark when they filled their pouches to capacity and slipped from the house. "What will we do now?" Theta asked. Henry looked down. "I don't know. I had something planned, but—" "What was it?" "I was going to climb up the mountain, past the top defrost towers and the force fence, to the top of the ridge." She stared at him, her eyes round. "Why, that's the edge of the world. You might fall off." "Not if I'm careful." Only a few in the valley could boast of going beyond the top row of defrosters, fewer yet of even going within looking distance of the force fence. Beyond it, tradition said, lived great beasts that could eat a man with one bite, while the ridges that bounded the valley on 3 sides, to the east, west, and north, were edges of the world from which one dropped off into bottomless space. To the south, where forest enclosed the mouth of the valley, tradition was vague, but the edge must be off there somewhere. It had taken Henry all summer to build up his determination, but now up was the only direction it was safe to go. "If you're not afraid, I'm not either," Theta said. "Let's go." Carrying the basket with its remaining supply of the fruit between them, they started up the slope. It was only a short distance to the top defrosters. These only went into action at blossom time for the apples and other highland fruits. From there to the force fence was a steep climb through rocks and brush. Their pace grew slower as they approached the fence. Their eyes scanned the rocks and scant brush for signs of the great beasts, but they saw none. Higher yet, about 1/4 of a mile, was the top of the ridge, the edge of the earth. Theta pressed against him. "I'm scared," she murmured. Henry's face became set. "We said we were going," he said curtly. "You can stay if you wish." He selected rocks for both hands. The force fence only gave them a strong tingling sensation. The plast sandals insulated them somewhat. The slope became steeper, but there was no indication of any great beasts. Too excited to stop and rest, although they were breathing heavily, they pressed onward. Would it be night down there, over the edge of the world? Stars shining? Would it be daylight and clouds? The top of the ridge was 100 feet away. 10. Henry flung himself on the ground, so if he became dizzy he would not lose his balance and fall. Theta did the same. Side by side, they crept the remaining distance. What they saw made them stare in open-mouthed amazement. Before them was another ridge running out from the northern range. It was pretty much like the one they were on. Between it and them was another valley. Defrost towers rose from among the trees. Over the top of the opposite ridge they could see still another. The northern mountains were lost in the blue distance. The shock to both was unnerving. Steeled to look out into limbo, they found a valley much like their own. Together they turned and looked back into what could be seen of their own valley. Even in shape, the two were roughly similar. They could see the tall, slim defrost towers, an occasional house, and the geometrical designs of the groves and orchards with their orderly rows of trees. There was town at the lower end of the valley, and there, at the upper end, was something they never knew existed. A large, ivy-clad building that stretched from cliffside to cliffside, and yet above that was a still blue lake. Henry looked ahead again. There was a difference in the other valley. There were no orderly rows of fruit trees, only thick forest like that which grew only in their ravines or beyond the foot of the valley. The defrost towers looked down on multicolored autumn foliage, even in the bottom of the valley where everything should be green. Why weren't there fruit trees for the defrosters to protect? What kind of a crop did this valley grow? Henry scrambled to his feet. Theta looked up at him. "What?" "I'm going down there." "What for?" "To see what they grow, what kind of people they are." "They might—" He smiled down at her. "I've become an expert at not being seen," he assured her. "I've had them pass 5 feet away." Theta got up. "I'm coming too." They reached the force fence, but there was no irritation. The forest started immediately, and it was fairly clear of underbrush. There were no paths to be seen, no sounds of harvesters, no unfamiliar trees. Even on the floor of the valley there were no signs of life, although they had seen and avoided several houses. Henry stopped suddenly, staring ahead. "What's the matter?" Theta asked. Wordlessly, Henry pointed to the bole of a dead and rotting tree. Its straight trunk had branches coming out of it in orderly rings, its top cut off to make the branches spread at ladder distance above the ground. It leaned drunkenly against a supporting tree. "Avocado," he said. "This was once a grove." The normal fear of the unfamiliar swept over Theta. "I want to get out of here. It scares me," she quavered. Henry glanced up at the sun. "Too late to cross over now," he said. "We'll find a house." He turned and looked about. There should be one close, on the slope of the ridge, so as not to take up usable land. He sighted one and made for it. From the outside it looked no different from those in their own valley. Beside it was an old apple tree with some emaciated fruit on it. At least they wouldn't starve. As the house was obviously empty, he went around to the back, got a picking ladder off the rack, and plucked enough fruit to fill their pouches, although it was unflavorable. Not until then did they venture to the front door and push it open. As far as they could see, it was like the houses in their valley, only it was cold, with a chill dampness. Light grey dust covered everything. Cobwebs festooned the walls. That it had not been lived in for years, perhaps generations, was evident. Theta clung to his arm, shivering and afraid. Henry shook her off. He strode to the kitchen and pulled open a bin. In the bottom was dust, smelling faintly of peaches. "We'll clean out a bedroom for the night," he said, re-entering the living room. In the bedroom, the westerly sun poured light through a dust-covered window, putting the bed somewhat in shadow. It, too, was covered with dust, turning the everlasting blankets into a colour uniform with the room. Their movements stirred up dust that danced as motes in the streaming sunlight, as if to bar their way across the room. They walked into it. Their eyes could now see clearly what was beyond. Theta screamed and sprang back. Protruding beyond the upper edges of the blankets were 2 skulls. They were outside, breathing heavily, before they realized they had moved. Henry stared at the still open door, at the black hole through the white wall. It was the first time they had seen the aftermath of death. For their people, there were places into which bodies were placed. From them they vanished like all other refuse. Shaken by the horror of it, they plunged into the forest in panic. The sun dropped behind the ridge, the air chilled. Bones or no bones, they had to find shelter for the night. Fire, naked flame, they never had seen or knew existed. Heat came from the walls of houses, with warm clothing and blankets. Henry's lips firmed. Dead ones, or no dead ones, they had to find something to keep them warm during the night. Another house appeared. With fast-beating hearts they entered. It was now warmer inside, but still chilly. They would still need coverings. "Stay here," Henry said. He strode into the nearest bedroom. Without stopping to look around, he stepped to the bed. Closing his eyes, he snatched off the bedding and fled into the living room. Together, crouched in a corner, the bedding around them, they spent the night. Sleep did not come immediately. Henry stared into the darkness, reviewing the day, putting together what he had discovered. "It all fits," he said aloud. "What does?" Theta asked. "The forest, the dead trees, dead people. Something happened to everything, perhaps all at once. To the defrosters, the heaters, the bins. It must have been in winter. They crept into bed to keep warm, then starved to death. All of them." "No, no," Theta cried. "But it did, and it's beginning to happen to us. Each year something stops working. The time may come when nothing works." "We can't do anything." "Yes, we can." "What?" "Find out why, and try to stop it." 3. At dawn, stiff and shivering, they stumbled outside and by unspoken consent started directly up the slope. By full daylight they found themselves in a chestnut grove. They stopped to fill their pouches. The last mile was made in the hot warmth of the sun. At the top of the ridge they stopped to rest. As they did, they feasted their eyes on the orderly groves below them. But Henry's eyes were seeking out the squares of brown among the green of the lower valley. He counted 20, far more than he realized. The defrosters had gone dead at intervals, years apart. His eyes crept up the valley to the structure at its head, with a captive lake behind it. It must be the house of the old ones the old stories told about, but no one had ever seen. From it they had worked the magic that made the valley what it was. There, they said, they could be seen and heard to speak. If he could get to see the old ones, ask them questions, perhaps they would tell him what should be done. "Where are we going now?" Theta asked. "To the house of the old ones. Up there," he said, pointing. "Perhaps they can tell us something." She clutched his arm. "You can't," she cried. They'll... "They'll what?" "I don't know. Something awful." "That's what they said about the learning house, but there was nothing in it but dust. I found, from the size of the chairs, that you had to start learning almost from the time you walked. I didn't even know how to start." "Then you didn't learn anything?" "Nothing." He came to his feet. "You don't have to go if you don't want to." "I go where you go," she said with stubborn determination. They had to dip down below the force fence to find water, then keep to the harvested portions where the masters had gone to town for the winter. They were lucky in finding houses where the keys had been lost, and thus had been left unlocked. It was noon the next day when they forced themselves through the brush to find themselves within feet of their destination. With Henry leading, they skirted it, looking for an entrance. Close to the center, they found a deep indentation with a pair of doors at its inner end. Cautiously, over the accumulated leaves and rubble, they moved toward them, wondering how to get inside. The moment Henry came within 3 feet of them, they flew open, inwards. Theta screamed and sprang back. Henry stopped, startled. "It's nothing to be scared of," he reassured her. "They say that the doors of hall in town used to open this way until someone broke a glass button on the wall. Come on." There was another pair of glass doors that opened the same way as they approached. They led to a large reception room with a desk and chair opposite the door, chairs in a row along the wall. The floor was red tile with a white line about 6 inches wide, circling around to a door to the left. Behind the desk was another door. "Sightseers," said a voice from out of nowhere that made Theta scream. "We'll follow the white line through the door to the left. Those with business in the offices will consult the receptionist. Please proceed." Almost in a state of trance, Henry led the way along the white line. The door opened and admitted them, then a second door. Here, everything was spotless, dustless, though no one had been there for years. "You are now in the generating room," the voice began again. "The humidity is 0. All dirt and dust has been removed. What you bring in with you will be gone in 5 minutes. They were on a balcony, looking down into a large space. On the floor below them seemed to be a huge cylinder, suspended between 2 metal-covered blocks. Only by the glimmering reflections from its polished surface could one tell that it was revolving. "Before you is the main generator," the voice began again. "If you look closely, you will note that the armature shaft does not touch its supporting bearings. It is held in suspension by polarized barometer obtained from Mars, so there is no friction and no wear. It is powered by water reduced to hydrogen and oxygen. The excess gases are used in the hoppers and storage bins to force out the air and preserve the foods on their way to their destinations. Some gas is piped to the disposal plants, in which all organic matter is converted into fertilizer." Henry felt let down, cheated. It was just an empty building containing soundless machinery and a recorded lecture. No old ones. Nothing he wanted. "Now behind you," the voice began again, "you can see into the control room. From there, every machine, store, or house can have its power cut on or off, and if anything goes wrong with its circuit, a button on the board flashes red until it is repaired. The glowing red button close to the window is the master switch that will shut off everything in case of an emergency, such as an earthquake." Theta pressed her nose to the glass window. "Just think," she breathed. "Push that, and everything stops." Perhaps that's what happened in the other valley, thought Henry. Someone pushed the red button, then couldn't get things going again. "Now follow the line to the next room and be seated. They will be shown how the complex of the valley was constructed and how it operates." On entering the hall, they found several rows of seats facing a large screen. Soft music began as they entered. The hall darkened, and the screen lit up, showing the valley as it was before the work began. forest mainly, a few farms scattered along the narrow bottoms. What startled Henry was that they were above the valley, looking down as they seemed to drift through the air. So the old tales were right. The old ones could fly through the air. Here was proof of it. He sat on the edge of his seat, breathing hard, waiting to see the old ones, giant of stature, who could tear a tree out of the ground or shovel away a mountain. But the first humans he saw were men like himself and those in the valley, men who pointed at places while others squinted in that direction through strange instruments. He wished he could follow the talk, but the men pronounced words differently and used many he had never heard. He had to use his eyes instead of his ears. They started to work right where he was. He recognized the outlines of the ridges about them, but it was done by no giant extending his hand and showering magic. Big machines dug away the ground. Other things with no visible means of locomotion brought building materials up a broad road where there was not even a path now. A little man, greying and wrinkled, answered questions of their invisible guide, and, as he did, he gave directions to others. Was he one of the old ones, not as large as himself, no older than his father? Behind him on the screen, the building Henry was in was going up, and men were making it, ordinary men, not magic. Were the old ones just ordinary men? Their magic not strange words and motions, but machines that manipulated with their hands and feet? They were not gods, just men who had begun to learn sitting in the little chairs in the learning house. He watched them dig the trenches from the groves to the hidden storage bins, put in the pipes lined with gravity-repellent barummel, lay the snake-like cables that he had seen occasionally where erosion had exposed them. He saw the building of town, the masters' houses, and the final planting of the groves. The record ended. Henry remained staring at the blank screen until Theta nudged him and brought him back to the present. The white line led on, past large offices on one side, on the other windows looking down into a vast storeroom that contained parts for repairing everything in the valley. The old ones knew that some day things would start breaking down, and had prepared for it. They had not prepared for life dropping into routine, interest in progress being lost. What need was there to spend years in school when everything was already done for you? The picture had shown some buildings close to the cliffs on one side that looked like the apartment houses in town. They broke through the brush and found one. Other than for dust, it was in good condition. The food bins were filled, but the contents had dried to the hardness of stone. As soon as they were emptied, they began to refill, but it was 2 days of constant emptying before eatable fruit began to appear. By the end of a week, they had the rooms they needed cleaned and some of the brush about the place cut clear. It left Henry free to roam the plant. He sat again and again through the record of construction, understanding a little more each time. He noted, for instance, where what was now forest at the entrance to the valley was once farmland, laid out in squarish, vari-coloured fields. He found his way into the control room, discovered how to trace the lines from the board to their end on the large map on the wall across from the board. One day, while it was snowing heavily above the permanent defrosters, he heard a buzzer sound and saw a light turn from green to red. He traced it down. It was the damaged house where they had first taken refuge. There was plenty of time to ponder. Each time it ended in the same question and the same conclusion. Something had to be begun before it was too late. The valley had to be stirred out of its antipathy. But how? One morning, before dawn, he sat up in bed. Theta asked what was wrong. "I'm going to the meeting in town at peach blossom time," he announced. "Something has to be done." Theta clutched his arm. "You can't! They'll kill you!" "I have to. Do you want our children or our children's children to die like those people on the other side of the ridge?" "No, but—" "I have to go. I have to make them listen." 4. The Peach Blossom Time meeting was always the best in the year. Those not already in town were on the nearby bottom groves. After it, the masters would return to the upper orchards, and the youth work parties would start their rounds. During the 3-day meeting, there would be dances and parties, an exchange of news while the assembled elders would judge disputes, pass on the qualifications of masters, deposing the lazy and unfit, selecting couples to take their places. It was the one time of the year when Henry could get the ear of everyone. They travelled down unseen, slipping into unlocked houses for food and the night. They entered town at the beginning of the first meeting. They made it unrecognized to the hall. It was not crowded. The day was bland. Most preferred to stay outside and watch the proceedings on the visi-screen. Henry and Theta slipped into a section on one side and awaited the clearance of the immediate business of the elders. There was none of importance. Within an hour, all that was pending was cleared up. The senior elder, emaciated and with shaking hands, faced the audience. "Any further business?" he quavered. Henry stood up. "Yes," he called out, "something very important." Theta fully intended to follow him, but she found she could not move. It was as if she was tied to the chair. The more practical of the two, she knew that the men he was facing would refuse to face the facts. All he was doing was placing himself in their hands, and that meant death. The elders peered in his direction as he gained the aisle. Ole twisted about in his seat and was the first one to recognize him. For a moment he stared open-mouthed. "It's Henry Callis!" he cried out. "He's proscribed for learning witchery! Grab him!" Henry stopped before him. Ole's words became a gurgle and dried up. "If I'm a witch," Henry said loudly, "I'm a good person to keep away from. Whether I am or not, I have something important to tell you, and all of you had better listen." He started again for the platform, those along the aisle shrinking back as he passed. The elders, from fat to withered, with the same uneasy expressions on their faces, watched silently as he climbed to the stage and faced them. He could feel their chill hostility. He knew now that he had done wrong, but it was too late to undo it. He stopped a short distance from the table, half-turned so the audience could hear him. "I have been living in the houses of the old ones at the head of the valley, beyond the defrosters and the forest above them, and I also have been up to the top of the East Range, expecting to look over the edge of the world. But what I saw was another valley just like this one. It had a force fence, defrosters, hoppers, houses, everything this valley has, except for one thing, living inhabitants. There were people in the houses, dead people, reduced to bones, the bones of people who had died from hunger and cold when everything in their valley suddenly ceased to work. That is what sent me to the house of the old ones, to see if I could find out what had happened. I found out there that the old ones were not giants who did things with magic, but people like ourselves who used machinery to make things, just as we make clothing with machinery here in town. They had machines that could fly through the air. They could go the length of the valley in an hour in a road machine. With machines they built these buildings, dug the trenches for the hoppers, did everything. They were just men. Men who had studied in the learning houses from the time they were tiny children. And I found out more. He stopped to take a quick look about the still hall. He felt the hostility. "And I found out more," he repeated. "I found that, in this valley, 20 banks of defrosters have already failed. 11 houses cannot be used, plus 2 taverns and 1 factory here in town. It shows that our own system is breaking down. Some day, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps not until the time of our grandchildren, everything will stop as it did in the next valley. If we want to keep living, we must start to learn how to keep these machines running. At the house of the old ones there is a vast store of parts and visograph records showing how it should be done. I ask you all to come up and see the record they have there of building the things in the valley. See the machine that keeps everything running. Then let me have a band of youths to start studying the records until we find out how to keep things running." There was silence after he finished. The elders eyed him, uneasy, suspicious. From the seats of the hall came Ola's voice. "Don't believe him," he shouted. "He wants to get us up there so he can bewitch us, like he did Theta. Take him out and stone him." Someone on the other side of the hall echoed the cry. In a moment it seemed that everyone was roaring it, rising in their seats, shaking fists. The senior elder motioned to the hallmaster. He stepped forward with 2 husky assistants who grabbed Henry. "Put him in the strong room," quavered the senior elder. "Keep him there until the day for punishment." Roughly, Henry was pushed around, led out a rear door to the stage. The day of punishment. 3 nights and 2 days to live. He awoke the morning of the 3rd night feeling cold. He opened his eyes to find himself in total darkness. For a moment he thought himself free, hiding out in some deserted building, that all that had happened lately was a dream. But from outside he heard a panicky voice crying that the lights in his apartment were out and it was getting cold. It had happened. Far sooner than he expected. It had happened. But what would Theta do? She had gotten away, he was sure, as no one mentioned her. Theta, that was it. She had gone to the plant, pushed the button, condemning herself and all the others to death. But that was not like Theta. She was too clever. That was it. Why hadn't he thought of it? It was a message, a challenge, a tool which he could use to free himself, get them to help him. More relaxed, he lay back. Dawn was already showing up over the ridge. More people would be getting up, more people rushing out into the streets in panic. They would remember him, come to his cell imploring him to do something. He would demand what he wanted. They could comply or face disaster. What should he demand? Someone came down the street shouting for the senior elder. The volume of excited voices increased with each minute, voices demanding to know why there was no light, no heat, no water, asking each other if they had them, hysteria mounting each minute. Perhaps it would be a time before they thought of him, but they would be before him before the day was over. "It's that witch in the strong room," bellowed Ola's voice outside. "He did it by magic! Kill him before he strikes us all dead!" The cry was taken up. "The witch! Kill the witch! He did it! He is right in there! Kill him!" Cold terror seized Henry. Theta's scheme was backfiring. There would be no reasoning with a superstitious, hysterical mob. Well, at least it hurried things up by a few hours. More composed, he came to his feet as they burst through the back door of the hall and stampeded towards the door to the cell. He even smiled slightly. If they thought him a witch. The key was in the lock. They had no difficulty getting in. He stood in the center of the room, the slight smile still on his lips. He raised his forearm to a horizontal position, pointed his index finger in their direction. "Who wants to die first?" he cried above the noise they made. The onrush into the cell stopped abruptly, those in front pushing back against those behind them. They followed his finger with fascinated eyes as he fanned it across the group of them. He stopped, his finger pointing to a fat, apple-cheeked grove master. The man shrieked, turned about, and began fighting his way back into the corridor. One man was tripped up and fell. There was a wild shriek of terror. Men shouted that he was killing the leaders by magic. To Henry it seemed only an instant before the passageway was back in its usual silence. He stepped out of his cell. He could see a mass of people about the street door surrounding the panicked men. The passage in the other direction seemed empty. He turned that way, passed onto the rear of the stage, felt his way across it in the darkness to the steps and down into the aisle. Calmly and without haste, he passed through the front doors into the next street and walked, unrecognized in the half-light and excitement, out of town. It was dark when he arrived in the upper valley. Theta was sitting at a table. She sprang up and rushed into his arms with a glad cry. "It worked! They let you go?" He looked about. "You turned the power back on?" "No. The plant in these buildings have a separate power source of their own. I wasn't going to touch it until I knew you were safe." He drew an apple from a bin and munched it. "We'd better turn things on again before the fruit spoils. Come on." The button, Henry knew, turned on as well as off. Henry pressed down the button, stepped back to watch the large battery of lights flash on, but nothing happened. Had Theta somehow wrecked? The red buttons all began to glow again. Then, a minute later, a bank of lights switched to green, then another and another. But Henry noted that an occasional light did not change. Within the hour, the board was lighted up completely. Henry could barely stumble back to his quarters as the reaction set in, compounded with disappointment. He flung himself on his bed. "I have failed," he kept muttering. "I have failed in everything. They won't listen. No one will." Theta wisely kept silent and covered him up. On the second day, they heard the sound of a group breaking their way through the forest. They slipped into the brush, ready to retire to a hiding place they had ready. But the dozen people who appeared in the clearing did not have the look of a vengeful mob. Several were almost elderly. Some were boys. 2 were young women. Henry stepped into the open, but not too close to them. "What do you want?" he demanded. They looked at each other, waiting for the other to speak first. "What do you want?" Henry directed his question to an elderly grove master. "I want to know what's happening," he began. "My hopper has stopped working. My defrosters were dimming. They blame me." A young man, strong, with alert eyes, stepped forward. "You are right about that other valley," he said. "I have been in it myself. I don't want that to happen here. I want to learn." "I do too," shrilled one of the teenagers. "I sneaked into a learning house too, but I couldn't understand." The others gave their reasons. All varied, but with the same intent. They wanted to learn. Sometimes how to repair an individual object, others longed for general knowledge. But they were willing to face the rest of the valley with him to get it. Henry took a deep, happy breath. There would be others. Slowly but surely the group would grow. "Come in," he said. "Rest and eat. Then we'll start making plans."
The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story.
Small World by William F. Nolan. Originally published in Fantastic Universe, August 1957. Narrated by Tom Trussel. In the waiting, windless dark, Louis Stillman pressed into the building front shadows along Wilshire Boulevard. Breathing softly, the automatic poised and ready in his hand, he advanced with animal stealth toward Western, gliding over the night-cool concrete, past ravaged clothing shops, drug and 10-cent stores, their windows shattered, their doors ajar and swinging. The city of Los Angeles, painted in cold moonlight, was an immense graveyard, the tall white tombstone buildings thrust up from the silent pavement, shadow-carved and lonely. Overturned metal corpses of trucks, buses, and automobiles littered the streets. He paused under the wide marquee of the Fox Wilton. Above his head, rows of splintered display bulbs gaped, sharp glass teeth in wooden jaws. Louis Stillman felt as though they might drop at any moment to pierce his body. 4 more blocks to cover. His destination, a small corner delicatessen 4 blocks south of Wilshire on Western. Tonight he intended bypassing the larger stores like Safeway or Thrifty Mart with their available supplies of exotic foods. A smaller grocery was far more likely to have what he needed. He was finding it more and more difficult to locate basic foodstuffs. In the big supermarkets, only the more exotic and highly spiced canned and bottled goods remained, and he was sick of caviar and oysters. Crossing Western, he had almost reached the far curb when he saw some of them. He dropped immediately to his knees behind the rusting bolt of an Olds 88. The rear door on his side was open, and he cautiously eased himself into the back seat of the deserted car. Releasing the safety catch on the automatic, he peered through the cracked window at 6 or 7 of them as they moved toward him along the street. God, had he been seen? He couldn't be sure. Perhaps they were aware of his position. He should have remained on the open street where he'd have a running chance. Perhaps, if his aim were true, he could kill most of them, but, even with its silencer, the gun would be heard, and more of them would come. He dared not fire until he was certain they discovered him. They came closer, their small dark bodies crowding the walk. 6 of them, chattering, leaping, cruel mouths open, eyes glittering under the moon. Closer. The shrill pipings increased, rose in volume. Closer. Now he could make out their sharp teeth and matted hair. Only a few feet from the car. His hand was moist on the handle of the automatic. His heart thundered against his chest. Seconds away. Now. Louis Stillman fell heavily back against the dusty seat cushion, the gun loose in his trembling hand. They had passed by. They had missed him. Their thin pipings diminished, grew faint with distance. The tomb silence of late night settled around him. The delicatessen proved a real windfall. The shelves were relatively untouched, and he had a wide choice of tinned goods. He found an empty cardboard box and hastily began to transfer the cans from the shelf nearest him. A noise from behind. A padding, scraping sound. Louis Stillman whirled around, the automatic ready. A huge mongrel dog faced him, growling deep in its throat, 4 legs braced for assault. The blunt ears were laid flat along the short head skull, and a thin trickle of saliva seeped from the killing jaws. The beast's powerful chest muscles were bunched for the spring when Stillman acted. The gun, he knew, was useless. The shots would be heard. Therefore, with the full strength of his left arm, He hurled a heavy can at the dog's head. The stunned animal staggered under the blow, legs buckling. Hurriedly, Stillman gathered his supplies and made his way back to the street. "How much longer can my luck hold?" Lewis Stillman wondered as he bolted the door. He placed the box of tinned goods on a wooden table and lit the tall lamp nearby. Its flickering orange glow illumined the narrow, low-ceilinged room as Stillman seated himself on one of the 3 chairs facing the table. "Twice tonight," his mind told him. "Twice you've escaped them, and they could have seen you easily on both occasions if they had been watching for you. They don't know you're alive, but when they find out—" He forced his thoughts away from the scene in his mind, away from the horror. Quickly he stood up and began to unload the box, placing the cans on a long shelf along the far side of the room. He began to think of women, of a girl named Joan, and of how much he had loved her. The world of Lewis Stillman was damp and lightless. It was narrow, and its cold stone walls pressed in upon him as he moved. He had been walking for several hours. Sometimes he would run, because he knew his leg muscles must be kept strong, but he was walking now, following the thin yellow beam of his hooded lantern. He was searching. "Tonight," he thought, "I might find another like myself. Surely someone is down here. I'll find someone if I keep searching. I must find someone." But he knew he would not. He knew he would find only chill emptiness ahead of him in the tunnels. For 3 long years he had been searching for another man or woman down here in this world under the city. For 3 years he had prowled the 700 miles of storm drains which threaded their way under the skin of Los Angeles like the veins in a giant's body, and he had found nothing. Nothing. Even now, after all the days and nights of search, he could not really accept the fact that he was alone, that he was the last man alive in a city of 7 million, that all the others were dead. He paused, resting his back against the cold stone. Some of them were moving over the street above his head. He listened to the sharp scuffling sounds on the pavement and swore bitterly. "Damn you," said Lewis Stillman levelly. "Damn all of you." Lewis Stillman was running down the long tunnels. Behind him a tide of midget shadows washed from wall to wall. High keening cries, doubled and tripled by echoes, rang in his ears. Claws reached for him. He felt panting breath like hot smoke on the back of his neck. His lungs were bursting, his entire body aflame. He looked down at his fast-pumping legs, doing their job with pistoned precision. He listened to the sharp slap of his heels against the floor of the tunnel, and he thought, "I might die at any moment, but my legs will escape. They will run on down the endless drains and never be caught. They move so fast while my heavy, awkward upper body rocks and sways above them, slowing them down, tiring them, making them angry. How my legs must hate me! I must be clever and humour them, beg them to take me along to safety. How well they run, how sleek and fine." Then he felt himself coming apart. His legs were detaching themselves from his upper body. He cried out in horror, flailing the air with his arms, beseeching them not to leave him behind. But the legs cruelly continued to unfasten themselves. In a cold surge of terror, Lewis Stillman felt himself tipping, falling toward the damp floor, while his legs raced on with a wild animal life of their own. He opened his mouth, high above the insane legs, and screamed, ending the nightmare. He sat up stiffly in his cot, gasping, drenched in sweat. He drew in a long shuddering breath and reached for a cigarette. He lit it with a trembling hand. The nightmares were getting worse.
He realized that his mind was rebelling as he slept, spilling forth the bottled-up fears of the day during the night hours. He thought once more about the beginning, 6 years ago, about why he was still alive, the last of his kind. The alien ships had struck Earth suddenly, without warning. Their attack had been thorough and deadly. In a matter of hours, the aliens had accomplished their clever mission, and the men and women of Earth were destroyed. A few survived, he was certain. He had never met any of them, but he was convinced they existed. Los Angeles was not the world, after all, and if he escaped, so must have others around the globe. He'd been working alone in the drains when the alien ships appeared, finishing a special job for the construction company on B-Tunnel. He could still hear the weird sound of the mammoth ships and feel the intense heat of their passage. Hunger had forced him out, and overnight he became a curiosity. The last man alive. For 3 years he was not harmed. He worked with them, taught them many things, and tried to win their confidence. But eventually certain ones came to hate him, to be jealous of his relationship with the others. Luckily he had been able to escape to the drains. That was 3 years ago, and now they had forgotten him. His later excursions to the upper level of the city had been made under cover of darkness, and he never ventured out unless his food supply dwindled. Water was provided by rain during the wet months, and by bottled liquids during the dry. He had built his one-room structure directly to the side of an overhead grating, not close enough to risk their seeing it, but close enough for light to seep in during the sunlight hours. He missed the warm feel of open sun on his body almost as much as he missed the companionship of others, but he could not think of risking himself above the drains by day. Sometimes he got insane thoughts. Sometimes, when the loneliness closed in like an immense fist and he could no longer stand the sound of his own voice, he would think of bringing one of them down with him into the drains. One at a time they could be handled. Then he'd remember their sharp, savage eyes, their animal ferocity, and he would realize that the idea was impossible. If one of their kind disappeared, suddenly and without trace, others would certainly become suspicious, begin to search for him, and it would all be over. Louis Stillman settled back into his pillow, pulling the blankets tight about his body. He closed his eyes and tried not to listen to the distant screams, pipings, and reedy cries filtering down from the streets above his head. Finally, he slept. He spent the afternoon with paper women. He lingered over the pages of some yellowed fashion magazines, looking at all the beautifully photographed models in their fine clothes. All slim and enchanting, these page women, with their cool, enticing eyes and perfect smiles, all grace and softness and glitter and swirled cloth. He touched their images with gentle fingers, stroking the tawny paper hair, as though, by some magic formula, he might imbue them with life. It was easy to imagine that these women had never really lived at all, that they were simply painted in microscopic detail by sly artists to give the illusion of photos. He didn't like to think about these women and how they died. That evening Louis Stillman watched the moon, round and high and yellow in the night sky, and he thought of his father, and of the long hikes through the moonlit Maine countryside, of hunting trips and warm campfires, of the Maine woods, rich and green in summer. He thought of his father's hopes for his future, and the words of that tall, grey-haired figure came back to him. "You'll be a fine doctor, Louis. Study and work hard, and you'll succeed. I know you will."
He remembered the long winter evenings of study at his father's great mahogany desk, poring over medical books and journals, taking notes, sifting and re-sifting facts. He remembered one set of books in particular, Erickson's monumental 3-volume text on surgery, richly bound and stamped in gold. He had always loved these books above all others. What had gone wrong along the way? Somehow the dream had faded, the bright goal vanished and was lost. After a year of pre-med at the University of Southern Cal, he had given up medicine. He had become discouraged and quit college to take a labourer's job with a construction company. How ironic that this move should have saved his life. He'd wanted to work with his hands, to sweat and labour with the muscles of his body. He'd wanted to earn enough to marry Joan, and then, later perhaps, he would have returned to finish his courses. It all seemed so far away now, his reason for quitting, for letting his father down. Now, at this moment, an overwhelming desire gripped him, a desire to pore over Erickson's pages once again, to recreate, even for a brief moment, the comfort and happiness of his childhood. He'd seen a duplicate set of the second floor of Pickwick's bookstore in Hollywood, in their used book department, and now he knew he must go after them, bring the books back with him to the drains. It was a dangerous and foolish desire, but he knew he would obey it. Despite the risk of death, he would go after the books tonight. Tonight. One corner of Louis Stillman's room was reserved for weapons. His prize, a Thompson submachine, had been procured from the Los Angeles police arsenal. Supplementing the Thompson were 2 semi-automatic rifles, a Luger, a Colt .45, and a .22 caliber Hornet pistol equipped with a silencer. He always kept the smallest gun in a spring-clip holster beneath his armpit, but it was not his habit to carry any of the larger weapons with him into the city. On this night, however, things were different. The drains ended 2 miles short of Hollywood, which means he would be forced to cover a long and particularly hazardous stretch of ground in order to reach the bookstore. He therefore decided to take along the .30 caliber Savage rifle, in addition to the small hand weapon. "You're a fool, Louis," he told himself, as he slid the oiled Savage from its leather case. "Are the books important enough to risk your life?" "Yes," another part of him replied. "They are that important. If you want a thing badly enough, and the thing is worthwhile, then you must go after it. If fear holds you like a rat in the dark, then you are worse than a coward. You betray yourself and the civilization you represent. Go out and bring the books back." Running in the chill night wind. Grass, now pavement, now grass beneath his feet. Ducking into shadows, moving stealthily past shops and theaters, rushing under the cold moon. Santa Monica Boulevard, then Highland, then the Hollywood Boulevard, and finally, after an eternity of heartbeats, the bookstore. Pickwick's. Louis Stillman, his rifle over one shoulder, the small automatic gleaming in his hand, edged silently into the store. A paper battleground met his eyes. In the filtered moonlight, a white blanket of broken-backed volumes spilled across the entire lower floor. Stillman shuddered. He could envision them, shrieking, scrabbling at the shelves, throwing books wildly across the room at one another, screaming, ripping, destroying. What of the other floors? What of the medical section? He crossed to the stairs, spilled pages crackling like a fall of dry leaves under his step, and sprinted up the first short flight to the mezzanine. Similar chaos. He hurried up to the second floor, stumbling, terribly afraid of what he might find. Reaching the top, his heart thudding, he squinted into the dimness. The books were undisturbed. Apparently they had tired of their game before reaching these. He slipped the rifle from his shoulder and placed it near the stairs. Dust lay thick all around him, powdering up and swirling as he moved down the narrow aisles. A damp, leathery mustiness lived in the air, an odour of mould and neglect. Louis Stillman paused before a dim hand-lettered sign, Medical Section. It was just as he had remembered it. Holstering the small automatic, he struck a match, shading the flame with a cupped hand as he moved it along the rows of faded titles. Carter, Davidson, Enright, Erickson. He drew in his breath sharply. All 3 volumes, the gold stamping dust-dulled but readable, stood in tall and perfect order on the shelf. In the darkness, Louis Stillman carefully removed each volume, blowing it free of dust. At last, all 3 books were clean and solid in his hands. "Well, you've done it. You've reached the books, and now they belong to you." He smiled, thinking of the moment when he would be able to sit down at the table with his treasure and linger again and again over the wondrous pages. He found an empty carton at the rear of the store and placed the books inside. Returning to the stairs, he shouldered the rifle and began his descent to the lower floor. So far, he told himself, my luck is still holding. But as Louis Stillman's foot touched the final stair, his luck ran out. The entire lower floor was alive with them. Rustling like a mass of great insects gliding toward him, eyes gleaming in the half-light, they converged upon the stairs. They had been waiting for him. Now, suddenly, the books no longer mattered. Now only his life mattered, and nothing else. He moved back against the hard wood of the stair rail, the carton of books sliding from his hands. They had stopped at the foot of the stair. They were silent, looking up at him, the hate in their eyes. If you can reach the street, Stillman told himself, then you've still got half a chance. That means you've got to get through them to the door. All right then, move! Louis Stillman squeezed the trigger of the automatic, and 3 shots echoed through the silent store. 2 of them fell under the bullets as Stillman rushed into their midst. He felt sharp nails claw at his shirt and trousers, heard the cloth ripping away in their grasp. He kept firing the small automatic into them, and 3 more dropped under the hail of bullets, shrieking in pain and surprise. The others spilled back, screaming, from the door. The gun was empty. He tossed it away, swinging the heavy Savage rifle free from his shoulder as he reached the street. The night air, crisp and cool in his lungs, gave him instant hope. I can still make it, thought Stillman, as he leaped the curb and plunged across the pavement. If those shots weren't heard, then I've still got the edge. My legs are strong. I can outdistance them. Luck, however, had failed him completely on this night. Near the intersection of Hollywood Boulevard and Highland, a fresh pack of them swarmed toward him over the street. He dropped to one knee and fired into their ranks, the Savage jerking in his hands. They scattered to either side. He began to run steadily down the middle of Hollywood Boulevard, using the butt of the heavy rifle like a battering ram as they came at him. As he neared Highland, 3 of them darted directly into his path. Stillman fired. One doubled over, lurching crazily into a jagged plate-glass store front. Another clawed at him as he swept around the corner to Highland. He managed to shake free. The street ahead of him was clear. Now his superior leg power would count heavily in his favor. 2 miles. Could he make it back before others cut him off? Running, reloading, firing, sweat soaking his shirt, rivering down his face, stinging his eyes. A mile covered, halfway to the drains. They had fallen back. But more of them were coming, drawn by the rifle shots, pouring in from side streets, stores, and houses. His heart jarred in his body, his breath was ragged. How many of them around him? 100? 200? More coming! God! He bit down on his lower lip until the salt taste of blood was on his tongue. "You can't make it," a voice inside him shouted. "They'll have you in another block, and you know it." He fitted the rifle to his shoulder, adjusted his aim, and fired. The long rolling crack of the big weapon filled the night. Again and again he fired, the butt jerking into the flesh of his shoulder, the smell of powder in his nostrils. It was no use. Too many of them. Lewis Stillman knew that he was going to die. The rifle was empty at last. The final bullet had been fired. He had no place to run, because they were all around him, in a slowly closing circle. He looked at the ring of small, cruel faces, and he thought, the aliens did their job perfectly. They stopped Earth before she could reach the age of the rocket, before she could threaten planets beyond her own moon. What an immensely clever plan it had been! To destroy every human being on Earth above the age of 6, and then to leave as quickly as they had come, allowing our civilization to continue on a primitive level, knowing that Earth's back had been broken, that her survivors would revert to savagery as they grew into adulthood. Lewis Stillman dropped the empty rifle at his feet and threw out his hands. "Listen," he pleaded. "I'm really one of you. You'll all be like me soon. Please, listen to me." But the circle tightened relentlessly around Lewis Stillman. He was screaming when the children closed in. The end. Would you like to know how you can help save more of the stories of futures past? Visit storiesoffuturespast.substack.com/about.